Thanks for being here this afternoon, or this noontime.
Took it off our list to be here.
I know.
For you, anything.
I'd like to tell you a little bit about the skeleton in my closet. Happens to be Colonel John Egbert Farnum. He was born in 1824. His military started in 1846 when he joined an uncle's regiment in Pennsylvania, and he entered the Mexican War, advanced from a corporal all the way to a sergeant major. At the close of the Mexican War, he became an express rider for the federal government. And he would ride from San Francisco to Veracruz, New Mexico, and from there he would go on a steamer and deliver mail to Washington, D.C. In 1846, as I said, he entered the Mexican War and an express rider. Many knew him as the Overland Rider. The minute you mentioned the Overland Rider, they knew it was Farnum. He participated in General Walker's expeditions into Nicaragua, surveyed the Ramsey route to California. In 1854, he volunteered for the Crimean War for a year. In 1857, he was invited as a guest aboard the Wanderer by William Corey, who was the co-owner of the schooner yacht and sister ship to the first Americas called the Wanderer. Farnum at that time, and it's important you remember this, had the rank of captain. He was a commissioned officer at that time. The American Civil War, he entered the Army as a major and rose quickly through the ranks, fought in the wheat field right here at Gettysburg. After the battle, he was among those who chased General Lee's forces through the Shenandoah Valley for the next 18 days. After Gettysburg, Farnum ended up in Culpeper, Virginia until he was mustered out and signed his name on the second floor wall of Brandy Station. Names of many soldiers, both Confederate and Union, signed the walls there. Okay, I'd like to talk about the case of the Wanderer. He actually was invited on a pleasure cruise aboard the Wanderer, and the Wanderer at that time was under the New York Yacht Club's colors. It had a speed of 22 knots, in excess of today's speeds, probably 25 or 26 miles per hour. Very fast. And I'd like to read from you an area called The Farnum Affair out of a book that was written by Tom Henderson Wells in 1968. He was a full captain and did extensive research on this particular vessel and this incident. 30 years after the trial, while Henry Jackson was still an important Georgia figure, he published a pamphlet concerning his part in the Wanderer trials. The people of this area were recovering from the ravages of the Civil War, and it was popular to blame rascally Yankees for pre-war crimes in the South and to try to show Southerners, particularly the Confederate dead, like Colonel Charles A. Lamar, as blemished heroes. Much of the account that follows, particularly Jackson's conversations with President Buchanan and Attorney General Jeremiah Black, are taken from this pamphlet, and so memories are a little tainted, but pretty much most of the story is correct. To Henry Jackson, the central figure of the Wanderer cases was J. Egbert Farnum. He presented to Jackson a connecting link between a widespread conspiracy and the Wanderer. Farnum was born both a dramatic figure both before and after the war. He was born in New Jersey in 1824 and was educated in Pennsylvania, served in the Mexican War. His personal friends were General C.F. Henningsen, Walker's chief of staff, and with General Robodeau Wheat. While the Civil War, during the Civil War, he became a much wounded and breveted Union brigadier general because he later became a customs officer in New York. I'm sure the job just came up for him. Often referred to as the purser or supercargo of the Wanderer yacht, Farnum also has been called captain, although he does not seem to have a seagoing background for that position. It may be that Farnum had expected to assume military command if trouble developed, or his presence may have been part of a ruse to make people believe that the Wanderer was part of some new filibustering expedition. It appears probable that William Corey acted as the captain in social and official matters, and that Nicholas Brown was the true mariner of the vessel. Such confusion over command was deliberate, planned, and usual among slavers, so that in case of capture, evidence would be contradictory. When the slaver Echo was taken off the coast of Cuba, a boarding officer asked, "Who is captain?" The answer given with coolness and dignity, "All are captains." Farnum left the Wanderer as soon as Farnum left the Wanderer as soon as she got to Jekyll Island with 400 slaves. Not a single witness reported seeing him while the Wanderer was being brought to her anchorage or afterwards on the beach. Aboard the Columbia, leaving Charleston for New York on December 15, 1858, he gave an interview to an Albany reporter who was on the steamer, and another journalist who saw him afterwards on the street of Washington behind General Henningsen struts the Wanderer Captain J.E. Farnum with an unholy odor, not of rosemary, but of ebony, clinging to his clothes and beard. According to Jackson, Attorney General Jeremiah Black was in April 1859 approached by a New York lawyer who said that Farnum proposed to supply with the log book of the Wanderer and evidence enough to convict the men who were prosecuting to be paid on after his conviction, or their conviction. Himself, of course, to enjoy immunity. This was an invitation for the Attorney General of the United States to commit an impropriety of paying a witness a large sum of money for his testimony. Black acted for Jackson's opinion. Jackson said that he did not think it was honorable for the government to be paying for such an arrangement, proposed arresting Farnum immediately. Black replied that he promised not to disclose by the offer, as he refused to allow Jackson to act. Jackson returned to Savannah for a grand jury indictment. The conspirators, except Farnum, who expected to be arrested and tried in New York. The United States Attorney for the Southern New York District came to Savannah, and Jackson furnished him documents and lists of witnesses, and Jackson adequately made a push for Farnum's conviction. When Cedric was very ill, he died during May 1859, failed to get Farnum arrested, recovered his documents, and in November, Brown, Regerista, Arguivi, and others were found not guilty of piracy. Piracy back then was known as just going to get slaves, slave trade. And the penalty for that was death. not only was he disappointed at the jury's verdict, but he also felt he was not fully supported by the Attorney General. Further, he said that the leader in the Wanderer expedition was notoriously in New York City, and he understood that the ship was co-owned by this fellow by the name of Corey and one of the richest men in the South, Charles Augustus Lamar. And Lamar was the real culprit and owner of the Wanderer. Jackson said that President Buchanan sent for him and told him that he needed to wipe his brow. That Jackson was wrong in believing the government was uninterested in arresting Farnum. It was a singular fact that Farnum could not be arrested. Jackson volunteered to get the special agent, seize the rascal himself, and present. The president agreed. Lucian Payton, a patent office employee and a pension fraud investigator and handwriting expert, tried to get the arrest documents straightened for Farnum's arrest. Jackson and Payton went to New York and got the Farnum arrested. He was brought to Savannah, Georgia, and held in a jail there before his trial. And this particular incident happened in 1857, 1858. They really didn't get him to trial until 1859. When Jackson returned to Savannah, he found Farnum had denounced him from jail and threatened to kill him because it was a false accusation. President Buchanan tried to intercede his arrest, but the arresting officers chose a different direction, and he ended up in jail in Savannah, as I said. Jackson secured permission for Payton, which is the attorney for Farnum, and he had a large, unusual nose, but Farnum couldn't remember his name. So there was an all-out search for an attorney with a large nose. They found him. Farnum was brought to jail in Savannah on May 21st, 1860. It was difficult to select a jury, particularly as Justice Wayne, also a prospective juryman, to be asked whether or not they had enough evidence to convict Farnum. The long-nosed lawyer readily admitted that he had an offer to attorney Jeremiah Black for between $5,000 and $7,000 for his testimony. The eyewitness trying to get into a real spicy part here. There it is. Farnum's still in jail. And some of his friends, including Charles Augustus Lamar and his followers, made their next move. The military companies of Savannah were holding their annual meetings, and the town was crowded with strangers. With those politicians who were not at the Democratic National Convention, County Jailers W. Stone left his deputy, Peter Luddy, in charge of the prisoners, including Farnum. We had a long time ago given his parole. Since he was not familiar with the area, they weren't very afraid that he would escape. Luddy put him in the cell, returned to the front of the jail, and somehow it occurred that some of Charles Augustus Lamar's friends came into the jail, and someone pleasantly said, "Peter, old boy, we want the keys," with guns drawn. Luddy thought it was a joke until he saw cocked revolvers pointed at him, Someone jumped him. His collar was turned and a pocket was ripped off, and his assailants grabbed the keys. They released Farnum and drove him to the Pulaski House, which is a hotel in Savannah. It doesn't exist anymore. And Farnum was the guest of honor of 23 gentlemen at a conveniently planned dinner for Farnum. One of the jailers came to the hotel and saw what was going on. He soon returned with a deputy marshal and jailer and a couple of friends. Hammers were drawn back on their revolvers. Cooper, one of the arresting officers, said that he had come to arrest Farnum. They said, "There is no one here that should lay hands on the captain." Cooper, if they had defied the law, someone suggested that arrest be postponed until the morning, when they gave their promise that Farnum would return himself in the very next morning. Badly outnumbered with no public support, they had been badly outmaneuvered. Lamar's group had succeeded in making it not look that important. The return of Farnum was made to look like an act of courtesy rather than civil disobedience with the power of government. The next morning, Farnum failed to appear. Instead, there was a bond for Farnum with the amount left blank. That afternoon, Farnum appeared, and he was ready to be put in jail. He tried to post bond so he could leave the jail, and they said no. On May 31st, 1860, Farnum and Stone, the jailer, were sitting on the steps of the north side of the jail while 2 or 3 o'clock in the sultry afternoon trying to get a breath of fresh air when there was a loud report. Farnum exclaimed, "My God, I'm shot." Lightning had struck 2 nearby palm trees, charring them several feet up on the trunk and making a 3-inch hole at the foot of one of them, but hurting no one. The bolt had come from an almost clear sky. After Farnum's piracy trial in 1860, Farnum, Home, Middleton, Stiles, and several others were found not guilty. Lamar and his 3 accomplices pled guilty on May 21st, however, and were sentenced to 30 days imprisonment and fines of $250. Although Brown had been kept in the county jail for over a year and Farnum several months, the jail was unfit for wholesome livability, so to speak, for gentlemen. So they were actually given a place in the jailer's home. Amanda B. Farnum visited him at the jailer's home, and for several weeks or months she stayed there. Delivering Farnum from jail, taking him to a public party at a leading hotel, defying law enforcement officers, and returning Farnum after the agreed time were not merely high-spirited pranks. The jury had convicted and continued overwhelming power of the Lamar faction. Lamar was a very rich man, and he could control anything. The town must be kept in a state of excitement, for its prejudices might be felt in court, and most important was the effect on Farnum, a stranger in the community. The ease of his release and the open defiance of the law made him confident to escape if he had been convicted in the first place. Further, it was a warning to Farnum that neither prison walls nor Jackson's assurances would save him from the vengeance if he betrayed the Wanderer conspirators. And the last sentence here says that Farnum never wavered. He always stayed with his story, and he was very sorry for the incident. He was actually, in my estimation, a Civil War hero. To make it all the way from a major in the Civil War to a breveted brigadier general. He was in the 70th New York Infantry. It was most likely he was a very willing participant in the conspiracy, but I'm not so sure about that. I think once he found out it was going to be a slave ship and they were underway, they either threatened him to kill him or throw him over the side unless he went along with it. And President Buchanan actually said he's one of my best Union officers. It's most likely that, like I said, he was a willing participant. This is an episode in his life he always regretted. Farnum acted as a witness for the prosecution when Lamar and the others were put on trial. The case was a farce, and the federal government was not able to make its case. 3 years later, when the war broke out, Farnum signed up immediately in a way to somehow make amends. Interesting news, according to some accounts, Corey and his passengers aboard the Wanderer, officers came on board to inspect because they suspected that it was a slave ship. And it was Farnum who is supposed to have pointed out the luxurious upper fittings of the Wanderer and challenged the officers with a broad smile. Hardly a slaver, is she? So concludes my talk. If you have any questions, or maybe you lost a little bit of my disjointed talk, maybe I can make a little clear movement on what you don't understand. Go ahead.
Tell us about whatever it is. Get the Wanderer?
This is the Wanderer. It's a sister ship to the First America. When we decided to compete against the British in racing, the First America was built in 1853 and very, very fast. Became a #1 and just outstripped all the other British ships that were competing. When the Wanderer was built, and it was built in New Jersey, Port Jefferson, I believe. If you look at it, and you compare the sails to the First Americas, this is much more radical. There are more additional sails put to it, even cross-masted. It was 114 feet long. In order to bring 400 slaves back from Africa, they had to build special decks above the main deck, and below they would put beams across and put other layers. But they were so cramped coming to the United States when they were dropped off at Jekyll Island that they were practically right next to each other. So you can imagine a 6-week trip underway like that. When we went to Savannah on a trip a couple of years ago, we actually went into the Maritime Museum, and there was a model there of the Wanderer. I traveled from Boston, Massachusetts to see this particular model. Things made in Salem, Massachusetts. But it's a classic. If you ever go down there and see it, you will absolutely get in tune with what happened to the slaves, how they were treated. Just unmerciful.
Please tell them what happened to the designer of the ship. Who did the America's Cup?
Okay. His name is Tom Hawkins. And he designed this particular vessel with breakaway walls so they could conceal not only slaves but weapons. It was a 15,000-gallon water tanks were installed, and they tipped off federal authorities, and they were stopped before they left the port. Searched the whole vessel, found nothing. as I said, he designed this particular craft, and near its completion, he suddenly fell out of his carriage and died. Was it an accident? Who knows? A lot of people have said that this was a ruse from the first time that this ship even had its first keel laid, that it was going to become a slave. And Charles Lamar, a real culprit of the matter, thought slavery should come back to the United States. He was also thinking of bringing slavery to Nicaragua so he could have slavery off the shores of the United States. So he was a real culprit at large. In fact, near the end of the Civil War, there wasn't anything he didn't have his hands into. Horses, guns, rice paddies, anything. And he was actually shot off his horse when he defied federal authorities to give up. It was like 2 or 3 days before the end of the war. But had he not been killed that way, probably by some irate, probably slave would have been brought to the United States. And there might be something I missed, but if you have any questions, I'd be more than happy to answer them. I don't know, did I answer your question? Okay.
Actually, how many what was the usual crew for that type of
14. 14. So it must have been like 8 on, 8 off. And if you go down to Savannah in their museum, they still have the original cook kettle that they used to make the gruel or the slop or whatever they fed the slaves. And that's really something to see. When you see something like that, you just go, wow. But he spent his whole life trying to tell authorities he didn't really plan on going on this particular slave quest, if you will, and that he was just a victim of circumstance. And I guess somebody told me that maybe he probably could have fought for the South because he was born down there, and they came up to New Jersey where the rest of the family was, and they lived out their life right here in Pottsville, Pennsylvania. And became a New York boy, joined Sickles' regiment. He was a senior colonel in the 7th New York, and fought right here at Gettysburg, right in the wheat field. And November 19th, we'd go there and we'd lay a wreath there. Happens to be a wedding anniversary. We didn't plan it that way. It just happened. And this whole thing has just really been a kick in the pants. Every time I think I'm through with some of the research, I find more. And, I have to tell you more about the slaves. They deserve to have a little more notoriety. Anybody ever go to online and find out about the Wanderer Project? These two authors are writing a book on slave descendants who are living now on this particular craft. And her name is April L. Hines. She's a professional photographer, and she's done a lot of the pictures on the face jugs. And you may or may not know what a face jug is. When slaves lost members of their family, they would not be allowed to put a stone marker at their grave. But they made, especially around Edgefield, South Carolina, you may have seen these articles, the face jugs. They actually made these face jugs on their own time and were allowed to put flowers in the top area to mark their graves, but no stones.
but they can put the jug there?
Yes. Some are happy looking, some are really grotesque and ugly. The ones that are scary looking probably just scare away evil spirits or whatever. But some of these Negroes and slaves actually became basket weavers, fellow slave people, along South Carolina. And the other group were mostly, they had farming capabilities. They were very smart. They did rice farming and they were very productive. But it's just amazing how people so oppressed have come back, so to speak, have had their own lives and raised their own children. The fellow that's working with her is an archaeologist, and he worked on the C.S. Humley in 1994. And of the largest historical ceramics found in the United States, Edgefield, South Carolina is a major contributor. And they have actually found face dregs still intact. And one went on sale, I think, a museum in Chicago bought it, $56,000. It's no bigger than a piece of apple. I mean, an apple. But it's really something, isn't it? But this April Hines supposedly is supposed to have a big, thick dossier on the Wanderer, and she says it's 8 inches thick. I can't wait to meet her and talk to her. I just found this information probably in the past 5 weeks. So, anyway, thank you.